So my last video of Kayan al-Bashar didn't get demonetized, so fuck me I guess. But today we are not building any animal habitats. We are building a brothel and a temple right next to each other because in Kayan al-Bashar that somehow worked. Also, just a fun little side note, every animal in Kayan al-Bashar is dead. Have fun. Yeah, I'm not completely joking when I'm saying every animal in Kayan al-Bashar is dead. I'm only half joking, because only half of the animals in Kayan al-Bashar is dead. But it has, like, with the latest update, all of the options that I had turned on or off to make Kayan al-Bashar like a true sandbox zoo with like unlimited money, making sure animals didn't die of age, those had all been reversed with the latest update. And I only noticed this when, first of all, I got the entire list of just like animals died, animals died, animals died, animals died, and found just completely empty habitats, because that's how old Kayan al-Bashar is. I mean, by this point it's 140 years in-game that Kayan al-Bashar has been going on. Actually, that is not even Kayan al-Bashar itself, that's just this build zoo. Then I also wanted to put my buildings that I built for today's episode in Kayan al-Bashar, and then I was notified, not enough money. Oh, those options have been reversed. Also, if any of the buildings of Kayan al-Bashar, if you're thinking like, oh, I want to put this in my franchise zoo, good luck, they're probably multi-million projects or buildings, because there's so many pieces. So yeah, the buildings in Kayan al-Bashar are all expensive. But yeah, now I need to go into Kayan al-Bashar and repopulate the entire project, because, as I said, entire habitats have just been cleaned out because for some reason the latest update that Frontier gave us reversed all of the options when it came to like money, animals, and like electricity and water and such, like those things that I turn on or off to make sure that like I don't have to worry about animals dying on me. But yeah, that was fun to come across. Anyway, let's talk about the actual buildings for today. So, as I said, we're building a brothel and a temple. Of course, right now, as you can see just by the color scheme itself, or you should be able to notice by just the color scheme itself, we're starting off with the brothel, which was supposed to be the temple, but then changed into the brothel. And with that, I mean like, you might have seen this, or will probably have seen this if you watched the tour of the old town of Kayan al-Bashar, because all of these buildings are eventually going to go into the old town of Kayan al-Bashar. But you might have seen like the green layouts of like where I wanted buildings and what shape those buildings had to be. And this one is one of the larger ones that I still had, so I thought like, alright, this is going to be the temple, it makes sense, it's a little bit larger. The other one is tiny, or at least in my opinion is tiny, because you guys know, Poisonblade doesn't build tiny things, so anything that's probably medium-sized to me is tiny. Anything that's large is medium-sized. Or just, you know, everything needs to be larger, basically. But when it came to the brothel, like the layout was meant to go for the temple, but I changed it into a brothel. And then also, the temple is far smaller, of course, than the brothel, because the layout was already smaller. But I also just kept adding things to the brothel, which kind of broke the brothel, or just the layout, because I added a tower, which wasn't in the original layout, so that kind of fucked up, because like the layouts were all because of the roads that I planned out, so that the buildings fit the roads. Yeah, adding a tower and then an extension and then maybe even another extension is kind of going against that layout. So now, of course, because I find my buildings more important than a simple road, I'm going to redo all the roads and keep the buildings. So yeah, the brothel turned out to be huge, especially next to the temple. Not just in like the floor space, like the width and length of the temple, also the height. Because this, the brothel is not, well, the largest tower, or the only tower of the temple, only just comes up to like the rooftop of the brothel, and then the tower of the brothel is larger than that still. So like the brothel just shines out over the temple. The temple is kind of just like the small little brother, I would say. Again, like, a temple and a brothel in canon or shouldn't be close to each other, or probably wouldn't be close to each other in real life. In Kayan al-Bashar, it works perfectly because Kayan al-Bashar is fucked up. Well, it's just crazy. Also, if that small fuck me, I guess, in the intro is going to get me demonetized, then I'm just going to be demonetized. Brain, work with me. It's again late. I wanted to record this voiceover earlier so that you guys would not get as much of unhinged Poisonblade. And then the weather decided to fuck me over because then it started storming with like thunder and everything, and I was just like, yeah, I don't want that in the background of the video because I'm already a demonic squirrel, but I don't need confirmation of that. But anyway, so yeah, you guys are getting slightly unhinged Poisonblade, but I'm trying to keep it collected this time. Although I can rant about that issue with like all of my options being turned on and off again, which wasn't fun. Yeah, let's go back to the actual building, shall we? That sounded so dry for some reason. But yeah, in Kayan al-Bashar, having a temple and a brothel close by somehow works. And then also, the temple and the brothel both are in the old town of Kayan al-Bashar, which is kind of like the harbor area. It's like the traders hub of Kayan al-Bashar. I'm using harbor very loosely because Kayan al-Bashar, in this fancy world of mine, is nowhere near an ocean, so the only reason I can call it harbor is because there's flying airships, which is, I think, a double up, or like, you guys aren't here for proper grammatical sentences, or just proper sentences in general. Like, it's the, like, let's just keep it as harbor. It's the harbor of Kayan al-Bashar. After a long travel, like a long journey through the deserts or the mountains, because Kayan al-Bashar is near the mountains, do you want to go to a temple and pray, or do you want to get drunk off your ass and probably catch 5 STDs? Because I mean, it's still like the old town of Kayan al-Bashar. It's not like the center of Kayan al-Bashar, so it's not the most upscale. It is well, it certainly is slightly more upscale than any brothel you would find in the regular suburbs, because there you wouldn't just get an STD, you would probably also get mugged and maybe murdered or poisoned. Well, that's kind of the same thing, but both end up in death. Maybe some pleasure. Dying in a brothel is... I should stop there. Anyways, so yeah, it just showed that like, oh yeah, people are first going to go to the brothel and then they are going to the temple to pray for everything they just did in the brothel. This video is going to be fun. But yeah, so the brothel turned out to be way larger, also way more colorful. But that's something that I'm just pointing at you guys for that one, because I was fine just building my regular base buildings, and then somebody in the old version of Kayan al-Bashar, the first version of Kayan al-Bashar that's now completely corrupted, mentioned or suggested to build more colorful buildings. Yeah, now every free building has to have blue, red, or purple. In my mind, like, don't make suggestions towards a squirrel, because I don't go halfway or, you know, take the middle ground. I just go full 200% with those. I do like making my buildings colorful right now. It's kind of like just the challenge of like making them colorful but not making them crazy. Yeah, when it comes to the temple, then it is fully beige. Because, I mean, I wanted to... Well, I need to explain the temple, I think, a little bit, because the temple is a temple of the Jinn, so it's not a temple to the Greek pantheon, because Kayan al-Bashar is, I don't know how you call it, multi-religious. Like, there's multiple religions being worshipped in Kayan al-Bashar, and just from like a story writing or world building perspective, that of course makes more sense, because yeah, anybody who's doing any sort of world building, if you think that there's like an area of the world that's like only worshipping one religion, it's usually not that realistic to have that, unless you have like a very strict government that's really just like persecuting any other religion. But most times you will have like minorities worshipping different religions, and like in Kayan al-Bashar there's basically 2 major religions. There's the religion of like the Jinn, and then there's the Greek pantheon. The Greek pantheon is basically the biggest majority, and then the religion of the Jinn is like, I would say 20%, something along those lines. And so it was kind of fun to just be like, oh yeah, I haven't built a Temple of the Jinn yet. Like, I have built one, like a huge temple up in the Mirage Mountains of the first season of Kayan al-Bashar. But so far, every other temple that I've built is a Greek temple. But then I had to realize, oh wait, there's another religion being worshipped here, or another religion in sort of like a big presence here. So I need to also have a temple of that. You won't see any temples of like Freya or any of the Norse/Celtic pantheon, because I kind of meshed those two up in Valhalla, because Valhalla is on the other side of the continent. The further you usually go from like the center of worship, the less prominent that religion usually is. But yeah, it was just fun to like build a different kind of temple, really being inspired by Ethiopian, like the churches that are basically just chiseled out of the ground or out of the rocks in the ground. Again, mostly just taking the shape of the windows and like the flat roofs and the overall just like look of the building, but then of course changing it because I wanted to kind of mix like those Ethiopian churches that we have in real life and kind of make them a little bit more, well, generic church-like building, actually, with like the more rectangular builds, the bell tower. Again, I keep adding towers to these layouts and they don't work just because of those towers, but I'm a scroll, I want my towers. You can't take my towers away from me. But yeah, the towers are just like, they are screwing up all of my layouts that I had laid out perfectly before. Now they don't work. Now I'm still happy because otherwise the buildings would be kind of bland. But yeah, just showcasing those different religions, like, because I am actually like physically building Kayan al-Bashar, so I'm somewhat physically building my world, I can really just go into the like the nuances of like the small, like the showcasing the diversity in Kayan al-Bashar, because that's also a thing. Like, every area is usually to some extent diverse. I heard that some people were like shocked that like, oh, the Roman Empire, we had like African and like Arabian or like Middle Eastern emperors. Yeah, of course. The Roman Empire was huge. You think that only Italians lived or Romans lived there? Just having that kind of like the fun of not only writing this fantasy world of mine, but also building it is kind of like the funnest thing for me. Just having like those stories that I can interweave with my builds. Also, oldest building in Kayan al-Bashar so far, and I wanted to really showcase that as well, because this is the thing with just architecture in general. It's kind of like just like fashion cycles, like just with like regular clothing, going through cycles of like what's in fashion now and what's in fashion maybe 10 years in the future. Architecture is kind of the same thing, although not like 10 years, it's more like 100 years that something is in fashion. Although lately it's going a little bit faster, but like we'll definitely see like buildings that, well, this is nothing new, that like some buildings are just old and have a very different style of building. But the thing with architecture is there's just a huge like hesitance to knock down any building. Like, I am a student in college studying like urban planning, urban design. That's not the correct translation, but I don't know what the correct translation of my field of study is. But yeah, I just get banged over the head with like, if there's an old building, try and keep it. Because first of all, it's cheaper to maintain an old building than build a new one. And also there's like sometimes historical significance, sometimes social, sometimes cultural significance. There's always some sort of significance to a building, even though it looks like it's falling apart. Yes, I have definitely had that in some project where I really thought like, this building doesn't look good, I want to get it gone, but then it's also like, it's most of the time because it's built like 50 years ago when a different style of building was in fashion. But when it came to Kayan al-Bashar, I made a point of it to just like have some buildings that have like both styles, that are somewhat mixing styles, preferring or having like a major influence from that style to showcase like, oh, that building was built when that fashion was, or that style was more in fashion, or was the more prominent one. And then you will slowly see like a transition into like using different styles, then just like combining all of the styles in just one major soup and just seeing what comes out of it, so that there's not like that separation that you can make between the styles. So when it came to this temple of the Jinn, I really just went with like, alright, what would be the oldest style of architecture in Kayan al-Bashar lore-wise? Ethiopian. Or I call it Ethiopian just for like real life references. In Kayan al-Bashar, in this fancy world of mine, it has a different name because I have... Well, Kayan al-Bashar, or just like the Empire of Ascentium, has like 4 different cultural groups in it. So it's sometimes hard to keep track of that, like, oh, what would be the oldest one? Because there's a culture group that is more like reminiscent or referencing Ethiopian, like Horn of Africa culture and architecture. Then there's a cultural group that's more like the Bedouins. I probably am not pronouncing that correctly, but that's more like the nomadic group. Then there's the group that's like colonists from Arcado, so that's where the Greek influence comes from. And then there's the new cultural group, which is basically a mix of the previous 3. Yeah, it's fun for me at least to have that in mind, to like, oh yeah, I need to build this with like a certain architecture style in mind, because it's a building that's like this old, so it's when that style was prominent or when that style was being built, and then oh, this new group of people came in bringing their own style of architecture with them, so their buildings are going to first just be that style that they bring in, and then slowly as the 2 groups intermingle and such, then the styles begin to mix as well. And then like at first you will have like, oh, you will have points that are just that style, and then points that are just that style in a building, and then eventually you're just going to be like, oh, this is a completely different style because it's mixing it so in such a way, and then adding things of their own, that you just basically are creating a new style. And that's what you see in Kayan al-Bashar. Or at least I hope you will be able to see in Kayan al-Bashar, where some buildings have this one style, some buildings have the other style, and then slowly you'll see other buildings that are mixing the 2, and then buildings that are just like, have completely mixed it, but made it in their own way. And yes, that's very much going into details that like, it's Planet Zoo. I shouldn't go into that much detail, but I don't care. I like going in that much detail, and also for this is just like completely out of nowhere, but I wanted to talk about it. But anyone remember Canturno, our favorite little plague-ridden nation in this fancy world of mine? So yeah, I for some reason sat down and thought like, what's this plague? Like I keep saying, oh, plague nation. Yeah, that was weird, describing all the symptoms and how quickly you die of this plague. Yeah. Like going over all the symptoms of like, oh, does this plague have boils? If there are boils, where are they? Why do I want it to make it so that they constantly throw up pus? I basically went from like bubonic plague or just the Black Death and changed it so that it was even more gruesome. And yes, if you let Poisonblade make a gruesome plague, you know that's going to be horrible. Because on a regular day, I just think of murder and stabbing people with scissors. Yeah, I've never done that, of course. Would never. Well, I have never done it, but I have gotten halfway with that one time. Then I realized that that jackass wasn't worth going to prison over, so then I stopped. I didn't stab him, I had the idea. I really sound demented, am I? I should explain this just before, like, even if I explained it before, just before anyone assumes that I'm a murderer, I had a group of toxic friends, or yeah, that's the best way to say it, toxic friends. And they were messing with some of my stuff this was in high school. And I just instinctively grabbed my scissors that I had with me and just made like the stabbing motion and stopped halfway through, because then I realized, first of all, what the fuck am I doing? Second of all, this asshole's not going or worth going to prison over. But yeah, that's the story of how I almost stabbed someone with scissors. I didn't actually stab someone. It did scare the living daylight out of him though. And then he started messing with my stuff again. Don't mess with my stuff if there are scissors nearby. Just in general, if there's scissors nearby, don't make me angry. Also when there's fire nearby. But then I just for some reason I have this weird fascination with fire. I'm not a pyromaniac, I'm not setting things on fire. I just like fire. I should stop now, before any of you, well, there's one person here who might be watching who is a lawyer. Go away. There's no incriminating evidence here. Bye bye. Hope all of you enjoyed today's video, because the video is actually stopping here. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. There's the like and subscribe button. If you want to see more, there's the notification button. That should work, doesn't work, it's as broken as Planet Zoo. And I hope all of you have a wonderful day. Bye bye, and don't stab anyone with scissors.